A millionaire was 3 seconds away from becoming the most powerful man in the logistics industry. But he stopped his pen, not because of advice from his board, but because of a whispered warning from a secretary who was hired just yesterday. Hello. Thank you for spending your time with us. It would be meaningful to know where you're joining us from. Please leave a greeting from your city in the comments and have a wonderful day. The world, from the 48th floor of the Harper Logistics Tower, was a silent, sprawling map of his own making. Below, the city moved in its ceaseless, frantic rhythm. But up here, in the climate-controlled stillness of the main boardroom, the only sound was the whisper of recycled air and the soft rustle of paper that represented a billion-dollar decision. Liam Harper sat at the head of the immense mahogany table, the polished surface reflecting his image back at him. A man encased in a perfectly tailored Italian suit, his expression a mask of practiced authority. But inside, a familiar hollowness echoed. Power was a relentless engine, and it had been a long time since he'd felt the thrill of the ride. Now, there was only the weariness of command, the constant grinding pressure of maintaining an empire. Across from him, Leandro Vega smiled, his expression a mixture of triumph and camaraderie. 20 years. They had started this journey 2 decades ago, 2 ambitious young men with nothing but a shared dream and a single, battered delivery truck. Now, Leandro was not just his COO, but the brother he'd chosen, the man he trusted implicitly. This merger, the acquisition of Vega's own logistics firm into the larger Harper fold, was the culmination of that journey. It was a homecoming. He deserves this, Liam thought, his gaze sweeping over the expectant faces of the investors. We built this together. His stepsister, Sarah Lawson, sat beside Leandro, her posture radiating a nervous energy that always seemed to cling to her. She offered Liam a small, encouraging smile. He nodded back, a fleeting gesture of acknowledgement. The contract lay before him, a thick sheaf of pages detailing the fusion of their legacies. His custom-made fountain pen, heavy and cool in his hand, hovered over the signature line. This was it, the final stroke that would secure their shared future. It was in that suspended moment of finality that she appeared. He had barely registered her before. The new secretary, hired just last week, Olivia Perry. She moved with a quiet efficiency that made her almost invisible, a ghost in the machine of his corporate world. She approached the table, her steps completely silent on the plush carpet. In her hands was a slim file, identical to the ones already distributed. She placed the folder gently beside his elbow, her movements economical and precise. But she didn't retreat immediately. She leaned in, her head slightly bowed, as if to adjust the file's position. Her lips were suddenly inches from his ear. And then came the whisper. It was not seductive, not conspiratorial, but a sliver of ice, delivered with the speed and impact of a bullet. Don't sign. It's a trap. The words were so soft, so quick. They might have been a figment of his own exhausted mind, but they struck him with the force of a physical blow. The pen in his hand froze. The air in his lungs turned to stone. For a single, deafening second, the entire world seemed to halt on its axis. He didn't turn his head. He didn't flinch. Instead, his eyes lifted slowly from the contract to meet hers in the polished reflection of the table. He expected to see fear, perhaps a flicker of madness or a desperate plea. He saw none of it. Her eyes, a deep, unreadable shade of gray, were perfectly, unnervingly calm. They held his gaze for a fraction of a second, and in them he saw a certainty, a solid, unwavering conviction that defied all logic. She straightened up and stepped back, melting into the background as seamlessly as she had appeared. No one else had heard. No one else had noticed. It was a secret detonated in the space between them. Liam? Leandra's voice cut through the haze. Everything all right? The spell was broken. The room came rushing back, the expectant faces, the billion-dollar contract, the pen still clutched in his hand. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, wild thing breaking free from its cage of composure. A trap? The word was an absurdity. This was Leandro. But the image of her eyes, that steady, resolute calm, was burned into his mind. It was the composure of someone who held an irrefutable truth. He slowly, deliberately, capped the pen. The soft click echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "This meeting is postponed," Liam announced, his voice a low, even tone that betrayed none of the chaos churning within him. He stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. "There are some details I need to review internally. We will reconvene." A wave of confusion washed over the room. Leandro shot to his feet, his smile vanishing. "Liam, what are you talking about? Everything's been settled. The lawyers have gone over it a dozen times." "It's a precaution," Liam said, his gaze sweeping over the stunned investors before landing on his friend. "My final decision." His tone left no room for argument. He turned and walked towards his private office, the door closing behind him with a heavy, definitive thud. He didn't have to wait long. A moment later, a soft knock came at the door. "Come in," he commanded. Olivia Perry entered, closing the door quietly behind her. She stood before his desk, not with the deference of an employee before a CEO, but with the stillness of a duelist awaiting the first move. Liam leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "You have 60 seconds to explain the most dangerous and potentially career-ending stunt I have ever witnessed." She didn't flinch. "I can't give you the full explanation in 60 seconds, she said, her voice as calm and steady as her gaze. "The proof is buried in layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts. It's designed to be invisible." "Proof of what, exactly?" he bit out, the words sharp with controlled fury. "That the merger isn't a merger, it's a leveraged buyout," she stated simply. "Leandro Vega is using Harper Logistics' own assets as collateral to finance the deal while simultaneously funneling funds into a private entity controlled by him and Sarah Lawson. Once the papers are signed, they will systematically bleed this company dry, declare bankruptcy, and walk away with billions. You will be left with nothing but the debt and the disgrace." Every word was a hammer blow against the foundation of his 20-year friendship. It was preposterous, insane, and yet... She delivered the accusation without a trace of malice or triumph. She spoke of it like a doctor delivering a fatal diagnosis, a terrible, unavoidable fact. He stared at her, searching for any crack in her facade, any hint of deception. There was none. There was only that unnerving, absolute certainty. "You understand," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "that you have just accused my best friend and my stepsister of a conspiracy to commit corporate fraud on a scale that would land them in prison for life. You have no proof. You have nothing but a story." "I can find the proof," she replied, "but I need time." Liam stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her. The city below was a galaxy of lights, each one a life, a story, a potential betrayal. He had built his empire on logic, on data, on calculated risks. This was none of those things. This was a gut feeling, a wild gamble based on a whisper and a steady pair of eyes. He turned back to face her, his decision made. "You don't have time," he said, his voice cold as steel. "You have an ultimatum. I'm giving you 24 hours. You will work from this office with full access to our servers. Find me one piece of concrete, irrefutable evidence to support this fantasy of yours. One thread." He walked back to his desk, leaning his knuckles on the polished wood, his face inches from hers. "But if you fail," he continued, the words a low, menacing promise, "if in 24 hours you bring me nothing, you won't just be fired. I will personally see to it that a lawsuit for corporate espionage and defamation destroys whatever future you think you have. Is that understood?" For the first time, a flicker of something crossed her face. Not fear, but the grim acknowledgement of the stakes. Perfectly, Olivia Perry said. The door to apartment 3B clicked shut behind Olivia, the sound a dull thud that seemed to absorb all the opulence and tension of the world she had just left behind. Here there was no scent of Italian leather or expensive cologne. There was only the faint, clean smell of old books and the lavender-scented laundry detergent she bought on sale. Her apartment was a small, meticulously organized space where every object had a purpose. A worn but comfortable armchair, a second-hand coffee table stacked with financial journals, and a single vibrant orchid on the windowsill, a small defiance against the worn-out cityscape outside. It was a world away from the 48th floor, a different planet entirely, and it was her sanctuary. She dropped her keys into a small ceramic bowl by the door, the clatter the only sound in the quiet room. Her body ached with a fatigue that went deeper than just a long day. It was the exhaustion of living a double life, of carrying a weight so heavy it felt fused to her bones. Her gaze fell upon the small pile of mail on the corner of her tiny kitchen counter. She didn't need to open the envelopes. She knew what they were. Reminders. Demands. Each one a paper-thin shiv twisting in an open wound. She picked up the topmost one, the logo of the city's most prestigious cardiac center stark against the cheap paper. Inside, the number screamed at her. A balance of $250,000, the cost of a new heart valve, the cost of her brother's life. This is why, she thought, her fingers tracing the cold, unforgiving print. This was the reason for the lies, the risks, the terrifying gamble she had taken today in that boardroom. She walked over to her bookshelf and picked up a small, framed photograph. It showed a young man with her same gray eyes, but his were bright, with an easy, unburdened smile. Her little brother, Leo. He was propped up in a hospital bed, giving a weak but determined thumbs up to the camera. A wave of fierce, protective love washed over her, extinguishing the last embers of fear. Pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. Despair was a traitor to the cause. All she had was this one, desperate, calculated plan. She had spent months meticulously researching Harper Logistics, uncovering the faint whispers of financial irregularities that no one else seemed to notice. She had fought tooth and nail for the low-level secretarial position, a Trojan horse to get inside the walls of the fortress. The whisper in Liam Harper's ear wasn't an impulse. It was the opening move in a chess game where she was betting everything she had. Accepting Liam Harper's challenge wasn't a choice. It was the only path forward on a map that had no other roads. He saw it as a threat, an ultimatum. For her, it was an opportunity. A 24-hour window to seize the resources she needed to expose the truth and, in doing so, secure the money that would save Leo. She placed the photograph back in its spot, her expression hardening into a mask of pure resolve. Liam Harper thought he was in control, that he was the one holding all the cards. He didn't understand. A woman with nothing to lose is a pawn that can topple a king, and she had far more than nothing to lose. She had everything to fight for. The fatigue fell away, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She had 24 hours. The clock was ticking. The penthouse office was a cage of glass and steel, suspended above a city that had begun to glitter with the onset of night. Inside, the only light came from the glow of 3 massive computer monitors, their screens a flowing river of numbers, charts, and encrypted files. The silence was thick, broken only by the soft click of a mouse and the rapid rhythmic tapping of keys. Liam had begun the evening with the full force of his authority. "I'll call in my forensic accounting team," he had declared, reaching for his phone. "They can have a preliminary report by morning." Olivia, without looking up from the screen, had countered him instantly. "No! That's too much noise. A full team logging into these servers will trip a dozen silent alarms. Leandro will know we're digging. He'll lock everything down and bury the evidence so deep we'll never find it. This has to be quiet. It has to be just us." He had bristled at the command in her voice, the casual dismissal of his standard operating procedure. He solved problems by deploying resources, by leveraging his immense wealth and power. She was telling him those tools were useless here. She's not afraid of me, he realized, watching her navigate the complex server architecture with a speed and confidence that was breathtaking. She argues as if this were her company. Hours bled into one another. They worked in tandem, a strange, unspoken rhythm developing between them. He would identify a potential shell corporation, and she would dive into its financials, her fingers flying across the keyboard, peeling back layers of digital camouflage. Another confrontation arose around midnight. Liam pointed to a series of large outbound payments to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. "This is it," he said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Standard kickback scheme. I've seen it 100 times. "It's not," Olivia said, her eyes fixed on the data. "It's a decoy. The amounts are too consistent, the timing too perfect. It's what he wants us to find." She highlighted a different set of numbers on the screen, a dozen smaller, seemingly random transactions, all routed through a domestic nonprofit organization. "Look here. The real money is being moved in plain sight, disguised as charitable donations. The pattern isn't in the amount, it's in the coding of the transfer authorizations." He leaned closer, staring at the screen. She was right. He had been looking for a wolf and had completely missed the snake hiding in the grass. The initial sting of being corrected was quickly replaced by something else, a grudging respect. She wasn't just a secretary. She was a world-class financial analyst, and she was operating on a level he hadn't encountered before. The annoyance he'd felt earlier began to curdle, transforming into a sharp, unsettling curiosity. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? Why was she willing to risk everything on this one desperate gamble? He found himself watching her, not just as a tool to solve a problem, but as an enigma. The set of her jaw, the intense focus in her gray eyes, the way she bit her lower lip when she was close to a breakthrough. He was the king in this glass castle, yet in this silent digital war, she was the one leading the charge. And for the first time in a very long time, Liam Harper had no idea what was going to happen next. While the silent duel unfolded on the 48th floor, a different kind of storm was brewing below. Suspicion, once planted, had taken root in the minds of Leandro Vega and Sarah Lawson, and it was beginning to bear poisonous fruit. The first assault was clumsy, almost theatrical. Sarah arrived at the executive floor just after 2 a.m., feigning a need to retrieve a forgotten file. She carried 2 cups of steaming coffee, offering one to Liam with a saccharine smile. As she passed Olivia's temporary workstation, she stumbled with practiced inelegance. The hot, dark liquid cascaded over a stack of printed financial reports Olivia had just finished cross-referencing. "Oh my goodness, I am so clumsy," Sarah cried, her apology ringing false in the quiet office. Olivia didn't react. She simply looked down at the ruined, ink-smeared pages, then back up at Sarah, her gray eyes as flat and cold as a winter sea. Without a word, she gathered the soggy mess, dropped it into the recycling bin, and turned back to her screen, retrieving the digital copies as if nothing had happened. The attack had been noted, assessed, and dismissed in under 10 seconds. Sarah was left standing there, her petty sabotage rendered utterly impotent. The second assault was more insidious. An hour later, Liam's private line buzzed. It was Leandro. "Just checking in, brother." Leandro's voice was smooth, laced with a casual concern that set Liam's teeth on edge. "It's late. You're still there? Everything okay after that bizarre little delay?" "We're fine, Leandro. Just reviewing some projections," Liam lied, his voice carefully neutral. He watched Olivia's back. She hadn't turned, but he could feel her listening. "Projections? At this hour? You've got that new girl with you, right? The Perry woman?" Leandro's tone shifted, becoming conspiratorial. Listen, Liam, I ran a background check on her. Just a precaution, you can't be too careful. Turns out she's got a brother with some serious medical issues, racking up bills she can't possibly afford on her salary. A person that desperate, they do crazy things for money. Plant ideas in people's heads. You see what I'm getting at? Every word was a carefully placed drop of poison. Leandro was painting a picture of Olivia as an unstable, desperate gold digger, a nobody trying to cause trouble for a quick payday. He was sowing seeds of doubt, trying to undermine her credibility, to isolate Liam from this strange new influence. I'm aware of her situation, Leandro, Liam said, his voice colder than he intended. Thank you for your concern. I'll see you in the morning. He hung up before Leandro could reply. The line went dead, but the poison lingered in the air. He looked at Olivia, who was still facing her monitor, her posture ramrod straight. The enemy was no longer a ghost in the machine. They were real, they were active, and they were closing in. The first rays of dawn were beginning to slice through the city's haze, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and rose. The office, which had been a fortress of tension all night, was now steeped in the profound quiet that only comes before the world awakens. Liam stood by the window, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in his hand. He had been staring at the city for the better part of an hour, his mind a battlefield of conflicting loyalties and burgeoning doubts. Leandro's words still echoed in his ears, a venomous whisper of distrust. But what he had witnessed tonight, Olivia's brilliance, her unwavering focus, her sheer tenacity, told a different story. The relentless clicking of the keyboard had finally stopped. He turned. In the soft glow of the monitors, he saw that Olivia had finally succumbed to exhaustion. She was slumped forward in her chair, her head pillowed on her arms, fast asleep on the hard surface of the desk. Her usually severe posture was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that was startling. For the first time, she didn't look like a financial savant or a corporate warrior. She just looked tired. An unfamiliar impulse moved him. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't the calculated concern of a boss for his employee. It was something quieter, more human. He walked over to the leather sofa in the corner of his office, took off his suit jacket, the one that felt like armor, and gently draped it over her shoulders. The fine Italian wool settled around her, a stark contrast to her simple, practical blouse. As he stepped back, his gaze fell on her screen. It was still active, displaying a complex web of flowcharts and data streams that made his own head spin. She had mapped out the entire money laundering scheme, connecting the fake charities to offshore accounts with a logic that was both elegant and damning. It was a work of genius, created in the crucible of a single night. Astonishment warred with his lingering suspicion, and the astonishment was winning. He returned to the window, leaving her to her much-needed rest. A short while later, a soft rustle of fabric made him turn. Olivia was awake, sitting up straight. She looked down, her brow furrowing in confusion, as she touched the heavy jacket on her shoulders. She slid it off, folding it neatly before placing it on the desk. Then her eyes found him, standing by the window, silhouetted against the rising sun. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. In the quiet space between them, something had shifted. She looked at him, and for the first time, her gaze wasn't challenging or defensive. She saw not the imperious CEO, but a man standing alone at the top of his empire, his back to the world, looking out over a kingdom he was suddenly afraid of losing. She saw the loneliness he worked so hard to conceal. And in that shared, silent moment, a fragile connection was forged, not between a boss and a secretary, but between two people caught in the same storm, finally realizing they might be the only ones they could trust. The emergency board meeting was convened with the brutal efficiency of a military tribunal. The air in the boardroom, the same room where Liam's world had been upended just 24 hours earlier, was now electric with a different kind of tension. It was the tension of a king about to reclaim his throne. Liam stood at the head of the table, not with the weary authority of before, but with a cold, renewed purpose. Beside him, Olivia was a picture of calm, focused resolve. In her hands, she held a tablet containing the digital key to the entire conspiracy, a single, elegant thread of data that, when pulled, would unravel everything. He had called only the most essential members of the board. They sat with expressions of grave concern, their eyes shifting between Liam, Leandro, and Sarah. Leandro, for his part, looked perfectly at ease, a faint, confident smile playing on his lips, as if he were merely a spectator at a mildly interesting corporate drama. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Liam began, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "It has come to my attention that the proposed merger with Vega Logistics contains severe irregularities. Irregularities that constitute a deliberate and coordinated effort to defraud this company." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. "Miss Perry," Liam said, turning to Olivia, "has spent the last day conducting a forensic analysis. She will now present her findings." This was the moment, the culmination of their sleepless night, the validation of his wild gamble. Olivia stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. She connected her tablet to the main screen, and her meticulously crafted flowchart, the map of Leandro's greed, filled the wall. "The scheme is structured around a series of donations to a charitable foundation called Future Forward," Olivia began, her voice clear and steady. "However, this foundation is a shell, funneling money through—" "This is an outrage!" Leandro's voice boomed across the room, stopping her cold. He rose slowly to his feet, not with the panic of a guilty man, but with the righteous indignation of the deeply wronged. "Liam, have you lost your mind?" he said, his eyes locking onto his friend's. "You're going to let this nobody, this corporate spy, poison you against me, against your own family?" He gestured to a stack of files in front of him, which Sarah promptly began to distribute. "Before you listen to another word of this fantasy, there's something you all need to know about Miss Olivia Perry." Liam's blood ran cold. He watched as the board members opened the files, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. "It seems Miss Perry has a personal vendetta against this company," Leandro continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "You see, her father was a man named Robert Perry." The name hit Liam like a physical blow, a ghost from a past he had long since buried. Robert Perry, CEO of a small but ambitious rival firm he had acquired, no, crushed, in a hostile takeover nearly 15 years ago. A ruthless campaign that had made him a legend on Wall Street and had utterly destroyed the man on the other side. "Robert Perry went bankrupt after that deal," Leandro's voice hammered on, relentless. "He lost everything, his company, his reputation, his home. A year later, he died of a heart attack, leaving behind a daughter who, it appears, has never forgotten." The room fell into a deafening silence. The data on the screen behind Olivia, so clear and damning a moment ago, now seemed irrelevant, tainted. It was no longer evidence. It was the desperate fabrication of a woman bent on revenge. Liam's world fractured. He looked from Leandro's triumphant, pitying face to Olivia. He was searching for a denial, a flicker of outrage, anything to prove this was another lie. He found none. Her face was pale, but her expression was unyielding. She didn't deny it. It was true. The foundation of his reality crumbled to dust. The fragile trust he had built with her, the connection he had felt in the quiet dawn, all of it was a lie, a calculated manipulation. He had been a fool, a pawn in a game he never even knew he was playing. But the betrayal cut deeper, coming From both sides. Leandro, his brother. He had known this. He had held this information, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy it as a weapon, not to protect Liam, but to destroy his only accuser. He's the traitor, a voice screamed in Liam's mind. The data doesn't lie. But another, more powerful voice, the voice of his own wounded pride, roared back. She used you. She played on your trust to avenge her father. He was caught in a crossfire of deceit, his judgment shattered. Who was the enemy? The friend who had plotted to steal his company, or the woman who had plotted to destroy his life for a long-forgotten sin? He couldn't see. He was blind, lost in a sudden, suffocating darkness. "I think we've heard enough," one of the board members said, his voice thick with disgust as he looked at Olivia. "Call security." The words sealed her fate. 2 guards entered the room, their movements quiet and professional. They flanked Olivia, their presence an impassable wall. She didn't look at them. Her eyes were fixed on Liam, and in them he saw no hatred, no anger. He saw only a profound, soul-crushing disappointment. It was the look of a woman who had offered a man a lifeline only to watch and let it slip through his fingers. That look would haunt him for the rest of his days. She turned and walked out, her head held high, a queen being led to her execution. The heavy boardroom door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence. It was the sound of a final, irrevocable end. Liam stood alone at the head of the table, the eyes of the board, of Sarah, of Leandro all upon him. But he saw none of them. He was staring at the closed door, a man completely and utterly broken, trapped in the ruins of a kingdom he had just handed to his enemies. The trap has been sprung. A carefully crafted lie has shattered the truth in front of everyone. Leandro and Sarah are hiding behind triumphant masks. But for how long? Justice demands that every mask be torn away. If you want to be there when the ugly truth is finally exposed for the world to see, comment on Mask below and demand the truth alongside Olivia. He didn't remember leaving the boardroom. He didn't remember the ride down the elevator, nor the silent journey through the city streets. The world outside the tinted windows of his car was a blur of motion and light, a phantom reality he no longer belonged to. The congratulations from Leandro, the triumphant squeeze on his arm from Sarah, it all registered as distant, meaningless noise. The penthouse was a tomb, vast, silent, and suffocatingly empty. The floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the glittering cityscape like a collection of jewels he had stolen but could no longer appreciate. This place, once the ultimate symbol of his success, now felt like a monument to his failure. The Italian marble was cold beneath his feet, the designer furniture stood like accusatory statues in the shadows, and the air, once filled with the scent of power, now tasted of ash. He walked past the bar without a glance, his body craving an oblivion that alcohol could not provide. He sank onto a sofa in the center of the cavernous living room, a solitary figure adrift in an ocean of darkness. And there, in the crushing silence, his carefully constructed world finally imploded. The pain came first, a raw physical agony that started in his chest and spread through his veins like fire. Leandro. The name was a curse on his lips. 20 years, a lifetime, the shared struggles, the victories, the quiet moments of trust. Had it all been a performance? A meticulously crafted lie? He saw his friend's smiling, triumphant face in the boardroom and felt a betrayal so profound it hollowed him out, leaving nothing but a shell. But as the hours bled into one another, the fire of betrayal cooled, leaving behind the icy grip of guilt. And a single image, burned into his memory, began to play on a relentless loop. Olivia's eyes. That look. Not anger, not hatred, just a deep, shattering disappointment. It was the look of someone who had seen a flicker of something better in him, only to watch it be extinguished by his own cowardice. She tried to save me. The thought was a torment. She handed me the truth, and I threw it back in her face. Why? The question echoed in the empty room. Why hadn't he trusted the data? Why hadn't he trusted the woman who had worked tirelessly, brilliantly, through the night? The answer was a bitter pill, and he forced himself to swallow it. Pride. Arrogant, blinding pride. Leandra's story about her father had been the perfect weapon because it hadn't targeted Liam's logic, it had targeted his ego. The idea that he, Liam Harper, could be a pawn in a woman's revenge plot was an insult he couldn't bear. And so, in that critical moment, he had chosen the lie that protected his pride over the truth that would have saved his company. He had chosen to believe his brother over the only person who had been honest with him. He had failed. Utterly. He hadn't just been a fool, he had been a coward. He had let them destroy the one person who had tried to help him. He had watched them lead her away like a criminal, and he had done nothing. He stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the city he had once called his kingdom. It was all a lie. The power, the success, the respect, it was built on a foundation of ruthlessness. He remembered the takeover of Robert Perry's company. He had been proud of that victory, of his own cold-blooded efficiency. He had never once thought about the man he had crushed, about the family he had ruined. Until now. Now, he saw it all. He was the villain in her story long before she ever walked into his office. And today, he had become the villain in his own. This was his punishment, this crushing weight of guilt, this suffocating loneliness. This was the price of his pride. He finally understood. An apology would be an insult. Words were meaningless. This wasn't about winning her back or seeking forgiveness. Forgiveness was a privilege he had not earned. No, this was about justice, a real justice, stripped of ego and self-interest. For the first time in his life, he knew what he had to do. Not for her, not for himself, but because it was the only right thing to do in a world he had filled with so much wrong. The king was dead, and from the ashes of his pride, a different man had to be born. The city never slept, but for Liam, the world had been frozen in a perpetual gray dawn of regret. He didn't go back to the office. He couldn't. Instead, he found himself in his car, parked across the street from the imposing, sterile facade of City General Hospital. The name meant nothing to him 24 hours ago. Now it was the epicenter of his shame. He had spent the day not in his penthouse, but in the anonymous back seat of his sedan, the windows tinted to a near-black opacity. In his hands was a secure tablet, a direct link to the Harper Logistics archives, a digital mausoleum of his corporate conquest. He had commanded his assistant to pull one file, and one file only, the acquisition of Perry Dynamics, dated 15 years prior. He had read it before, of course. Back then it was a case study in ruthless efficiency, a masterpiece of leverage and pressure. Now, reading the same words, he saw not a victory, but a vivisection. He saw the lines detailing the aggressive short selling of Perry's stock, a move designed to create panic. He saw the calculated media leaks questioning Robert Perry's leadership. He saw the final, brutally low offer, delivered not as a negotiation, but as an executioner's sentence. He remembered the man himself, a proud, brilliant engineer who had refused to be intimidated, who had fought until the very end. Liam had seen it as stubbornness then. Now, he saw it as a father, trying to save his legacy, his family's future. The report concluded with a cold, one-line summary of the aftermath. Robert Perry files for personal bankruptcy. There was no mention of the heart attack a year later. There was no mention of the family left behind in the wreckage. To the victor, the vanquished were merely a footnote. His hands shaking with a fury directed entirely at himself, he closed the file. The next search was harder. It felt like a violation, a trespass, into a life he had already damaged beyond repair. He used his private resources to run a search on Olivia Perry, not a corporate background check, but a personal one. The facts Leandro had weaponized in the boardroom were all there, but stripped of their malicious spin, they told a story not of vengeance, but of desperation and fierce loyalty. He saw the mountain of medical debt. He saw the name Leo Perry and a diagnosis that made his own heart ache: congenital heart failure. He saw the projected cost for the surgery that could save the young man's life: $250,000. The number hung in the air, mocking him. It was a figure he could spend on a watch without a second thought. For Olivia, it was an insurmountable wall standing between her brother and death. He finally understood everything: her meticulous plan to get a job at his company, the desperate gamble of the whisper, the unwavering focus during their 24-hour duel. It was never about revenge. It was about survival. She wasn't trying to destroy his kingdom. She was trying to save the only family she had left. He leaned his head back against the cool leather of the seat, the tablet falling from his hands. The truth was a bitter, corrosive acid, dissolving the last vestiges of his pride. He had taken everything from her family: their company, their security, their father, and in his blind arrogance he had almost taken the one thing she had left to fight for: hope. An apology? The word was a joke, a pathetic, meaningless gesture. How do you apologize for a tragedy you set in motion 15 years ago? How do you say sorry for being the monster in someone's life? He looked out the window at the hospital, at the endless stream of people coming and going, each with their own story of pain and hope. He couldn't erase the past. He couldn't undo the damage he had done. But he could change the future. His decision was instant, absolute, and clear. He picked up his phone, his fingers moving with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about buying forgiveness. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he didn't deserve it. This was about doing the one thing he should have done from the very beginning. It was time to act. The first call was to a number he hadn't dialed in years: the private line of the director of the Harper Family Foundation, a charitable entity his mother had established, one he had always viewed with detached indifference as a useful tool for tax purposes. The director, a kind, elderly woman named Eleanor, was audibly surprised to hear from him. Liam didn't waste time on pleasantries. His voice when he spoke was devoid of its usual command. It was quiet, measured, and heavy with a resolve that left no room for questions. "Eleanor," he said, "I need to make an anonymous donation. $250,000 to be transferred from my personal accounts immediately." He could hear the rustle of paper on the other end. "Of course, Liam. To which organization shall we direct the funds?" "It's not for an organization," he stated. "It's for an individual's medical expenses at City General Hospital. The patient's name is Leo Perry." He spelled the name out, each letter a small penance. "The funds are to cover a specific cardiac procedure." There was a pause. "That's highly unusual, Liam. A direct grant of this nature—" "The conditions are non-negotiable," he cut in, his voice firm but without its old edge of impatience. "The grant must be presented to the family as coming from a general fund, something like the Community Medical Support Initiative. It must be untraceable. My name, the Harper name, is not to be associated with it under any circumstances. Not now, not ever. Is that perfectly clear? He was met with a moment of profound silence, and in it he felt the director wasn't just processing the instructions, but hearing the man behind them. Perfectly, Liam, she finally said, her voice softer now. It will be done exactly as you wish. He ended the call and leaned his head against the window. $250,000. The transaction was a mere formality, a flicker in the vast constellation of his wealth. But the act itself felt monumental. It was the first decision he had made in years that wasn't for profit, for power, or for pride. It was a quiet, solitary act of atonement in a life that had been deafeningly loud with selfishness. This isn't to buy forgiveness, he thought, the words a silent vow. Forgiveness isn't for sale. This is a debt being paid. It wasn't a grand gesture designed to win her back. It was a silent, anonymous attempt to right a terrible wrong, to give back the one thing he had almost destroyed, her brother's future. For the first time since he'd walked out of that boardroom, a sliver of peace settled in his soul. It wasn't happiness. It was the quiet, solid feeling of a man who had finally chosen to carry his own weight. The small apartment felt like it was closing in on Olivia. The single orchid on her windowsill, once a symbol of defiance, now seemed to mock her with its vibrant, unyielding life. She was moving in a fog of despair, mechanically placing her few possessions into a cardboard box. Her job was gone. Her carefully constructed plan was in ruins, and the hope that had sustained her for so long had evaporated, leaving behind the bitter taste of failure. Her phone buzzed on the counter, the sound an unwelcome intrusion. She ignored it. It was probably the hospital, another gentle reminder of the impossible bill, another twist of the knife. But it buzzed again, insistent. With a sigh of resignation, she answered, her voice flat and tired. Hello? Am I speaking with Ms. Olivia Perry? The voice on the other end was professional, almost cheerful. Yes. Who is this? This is Susan from the Financial Administration Office at City General. I'm calling with an update regarding your brother, Leo Perry. Olivia's heart seized. Is something wrong? Oh, no, not at all. I'm calling with wonderful news, Susan said, her voice bright. I'm so pleased to inform you that the full outstanding balance for Leo's scheduled surgery has been covered by a grant. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from meaning. I'm sorry, a what? A grant from the Community Medical Support Initiative, Susan explained patiently. His case was reviewed, and they've awarded the full amount. The surgery is completely funded. We can proceed as soon as he's ready. The cardboard box slipped from Olivia's numb fingers, its contents spilling onto the floor. She sank onto her worn armchair, the phone still pressed to her ear, her mind reeling. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden, blurring the small room into a watercolor of impossible relief. She choked out a thank you, her voice cracking, and ended the call. For a long moment, she just sat there, letting the sobs come, not of despair, but of a joy so overwhelming it was painful. The crushing weight she had carried for years, the relentless, suffocating pressure, was gone. Leo was going to be okay. He was going to live. But as the first tidal wave of emotion receded, her analytical mind, the one that saw patterns in chaos, began to stir. The Community Medical Support Initiative. She had never heard of it. She had applied for dozens of grants, all of which had been denied. And the timing, It was too perfect. The amount. It was too exact. A single, unwelcome thought pierced through her joy. A coincidence of this magnitude wasn't a coincidence. It was an intervention. Her mind immediately went to him, to Liam Harper. It was impossible, it was illogical. He had cast her out, believed the worst of her. And yet, who else had the resources? Who else knew the exact, desperate circumstances she was in? She had no proof. Nothing but a gut feeling, a suspicion that felt as certain as the data she had once shown him on a screen. She stood up, her legs still unsteady, and looked around her small apartment, at the life she had been so ready to leave behind. Someone had just handed her a miracle, and she had no idea if it was an act of grace or the first move in a new, incomprehensible game. The coffee shop was a small, anonymous place tucked away on a quiet side street, smelling of roasted beans and old wood. It was neutral ground, a world away from the cold glass and steel of Harper Logistics. Olivia sat at a small table in the corner, a cup of untouched tea growing cold in front of her. A week had passed since the miracle. A week since Leo's surgery had been successfully scheduled, paid for by a ghost. And a week since she had received the cryptic message from a blocked number. I need to talk, for justice, not for forgiveness. She didn't know why she had agreed to come. Perhaps it was the word justice, or perhaps it was a dangerous, lingering curiosity to see the man who had shattered her world, then mysteriously saved it. When Liam Harper walked in, he was almost unrecognizable. The impeccably tailored Italian suit was gone, replaced by a simple, dark sweater and trousers. The aura of untouchable power that had always surrounded him had vanished. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered, but there was a new, quiet determination in his posture. He was no longer a king in his castle, but a soldier walking onto a battlefield he knew he had to face alone. He saw her and walked over, his steps measured. He didn't offer a handshake or a superficial greeting. He simply sat down, the silence between them thick with the weight of everything unsaid. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low and devoid of its former arrogance. Olivia remained silent, her gray eyes watchful, analytical. She would not make this easy for him. He seemed to understand. He didn't launch into a prepared apology. Instead, he placed a slim, encrypted tablet on the table and slid it across to her, the gesture a deliberate echo of their first night working together. "Before I say anything else," he said, "you need to see this." Warily, she unlocked the device. It wasn't the financial data she had uncovered. This was something different, something far more personal and damning. It was a collection of encrypted emails between Leandro and a private investigator dating back 6 months. They detailed the entire plot, not just to defraud the company, but to frame Liam for it if anything went wrong. There were audio files, secretly recorded conversations where Leandro and Sarah mocked Liam's blind trust, laughing about how they would bleed his empire dry. It was evidence she never could have found, evidence gathered from the deepest, most personal corners of a 20-year friendship. It was proof that he had been working, digging, fighting back on his own. She looked up from the screen, her expression unreadable. He finally met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw not a trace of pride in his eyes, only a profound, humbling regret. "I was wrong," he said, the words simple, direct, and heavy with the truth of his failure. "Wrong about you, wrong about Leandro, wrong about everything. My pride, it made me a fool. And a coward." He took a breath, the confession costing him more than any billion-dollar deal. "But I can't expose them alone now. They control the board, the narrative. Anything I do will look like retaliation from a disgraced CEO. He leaned forward slightly, his hands flat on the table. The power dynamic between them had been irrevocably broken, and now he was rebuilding it on new terms. "I don't need a secretary, Olivia," he said, his voice resonating with a sincerity she couldn't deny. "I need a partner." The word hung in the air between them. Partner, an equal, the one thing she had never been in his world. She studied his face, searching for any hint of manipulation, any flicker of the old Liam Harper. It wasn't there. She saw a man who had been stripped of everything and, in the wreckage, had found a piece of his own humanity. He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her justice, their justice. A slow, deliberate nod was her only answer. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't about him. It was for her father. It was for the truth. "All right, partner," Olivia said, her voice steady and clear as she slid the tablet back towards him. "Let's get to work." The grand ballroom glittered with the cold, hard light of corporate triumph. Hundreds of investors, journalists, and industry titans mingled under the massive Harper Logistics logo, which was projected onto every available surface. It was the launch of their new automated drone delivery system, a project Liam had championed for years. Tonight, however, it was Leandro Vega's coronation. He moved through the crowd with the easy grace of a king, taking possession of his rightful domain. Sarah Lawson, a radiant, triumphant queen, on his arm. From the shadows at the back of the room, Liam watched him. He felt a pang, not of envy, but of a deep, sorrowful nostalgia for the man he thought he knew. Beside him, Olivia, dressed in a simple, elegant dark dress, was a beacon of calm in the swirling chaos. They were a team, two silent partners moving with a shared, unspoken purpose. "The system is primed," Olivia murmured, her eyes scanning the room, tracking the movements of their targets. "I've created a ghost vulnerability in the final transfer protocol for the offshore accounts. It will send an urgent security alert directly to his personal device, warning of a potential asset seizure. It will tell him the only way to secure the funds is to log in with his highest credentials and manually authorize a transfer to a new, secure server. A server I now control. And he'll have to do it himself," Liam added, his gaze locking onto Leandro. "He's too arrogant to delegate the final move, the one that gives him everything." "He'll be tempted to act immediately," Olivia said. "Your job is to make sure he's too distracted to think and too pressured to wait." Liam gave a slight nod. "It's time." He separated from her, melting into the crowd, his face a mask of pleasant neutrality. He exchanged greetings, shook hands, played the part of the deposed founder gracefully attending his successor's victory party. Meanwhile, Olivia slipped away, not towards the exit, but towards a service corridor that led to the event's central audio-visual control room. The bait was ready. Now they just needed to spring the trap. On stage, Leandro was in his element, delivering a charismatic speech about innovation and a bold new future. It was at the height of his address that a single, discreet buzz vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it, but a second, more insistent buzz followed. A quick glance at his private device sent a jolt of ice through his veins. The words on the screen screamed at him. "Urgent. Asset integrity compromised. Manual override required." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his triumphant facade. This was the final, largest transfer, the culmination of his entire plan. Just as he was about to cut his speech short, a familiar voice cut through the applause. "If I may add a few words." Liam Harper was walking onto the stage. The room fell into a stunned silence. Leandro was frozen, trapped between the urgent need to act and the social impossibility of stopping Liam from speaking. Liam took the microphone, his presence commanding the room in a way Leandro's never could. He didn't look at Leandro. He looked out at the crowd, at the board members, at the legacy he had built. Legacy is a curious thing, Liam began, his voice quiet but resonant. It's not just about what we build, but what we build it on. Is it built on a foundation of trust, of partnership, or is it built on something else? As he spoke, Leandro and Sarah exchanged a panicked look. This was the distraction. This was their window. Believing Liam was simply having a moment of public pathetic reflection, they slipped off the stage and hurried towards the private office behind the ballroom. Olivia, watching from a monitor in the control room, saw them go. "They've taken the bait," she whispered into a small microphone. On stage, Liam's speech was reaching its crescendo. "Tonight we celebrate the future. But before we look forward, I think it's important that we all see the true foundation this new era of Harper Logistics is being built upon." It was the signal. In the control room, Olivia's fingers flew across the keyboard. In the back office, Leandro and Sarah logged into the system. "He's making a fool of himself," Sarah sneered as Leandro's fingers typed the authorization codes. "While he's crying about his legacy, we're taking it." He hit enter. Back in the ballroom, the massive screen behind Liam, which was supposed to show the drone promotional video, flickered. The Harper Logistics logo dissolved, replaced not by a video, but by Olivia's elegant, damning flowchart of the entire money laundering scheme. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Then came the emails, the offshore account numbers, and finally the audio file. Leandro's voice, amplified by the ballroom's concert-grade speakers, filled the room, mocking Liam's blind trust, laughing about how they would bleed his empire dry. The room was utterly silent, the only sound the recorded voices of Leandro and Sarah, confessing their entire conspiracy in their own arrogant, triumphant words. The doors to the ballroom burst open, but it wasn't Leandro and Sarah returning. It was a team of federal agents, moving with quiet, grim purpose. The public address system clicked off, leaving a ringing silence. Across the room, Liam's eyes found Olivia's. She had emerged from the control room and was standing near the back wall. In that shared glance, there was no celebration. Only a quiet, profound acknowledgement. They had done it. Not as a boss and a secretary, but as partners. Justice had been served. The chaos of the ballroom had given way to the profound silence of the city at night. They walked along the riverbank, the cool air a welcome balm after the searing intensity of the evening. The dark water flowed beside them, a steady, indifferent current, carrying away the wreckage of their shared storm. The city lights across the river were a soft, distant glitter, no longer a kingdom to be conquered, but simply a backdrop to this quiet, pivotal moment. All the battles had been won. The traitors were exposed. Justice was in motion, and the truth had finally prevailed. But one final reckoning remained, the one that mattered more than all the others. Liam stopped, turning to face her under the soft glow of a lone lamppost. The man who had once commanded boardrooms with an iron will now seemed stripped of all his armor. He was just a man, vulnerable and utterly sincere. "Olivia," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried more weight than any command he had ever given. I never properly said, 'I'm sorry.'" He looked away for a moment, gathering the words he knew he had no right to expect her to accept. "I'm not sorry for what happened in the boardroom. That was just the final act of my own stupidity. I'm sorry for 15 years ago. I'm sorry for what my ambition did to your father, to your family. I was a man who saw business as a war, and I never once stopped to consider the casualties. I can't undo that. I know that. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see him, and I am truly, deeply sorry for the pain I caused." He finally met her eyes, and in them, she saw the full, humbling weight of his regret. This wasn't a strategic apology, it was a confession. And I'm sorry for not trusting you, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. You were the only person who told me the truth, and I was too proud and too blind to see it. That is a failure I will carry for the rest of my life. He took a hesitant step closer, the space between them charged with a fragile, unspoken hope. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Olivia, but I have to tell you the truth of what I feel now. In that office, working with you, I saw what a real partner was, someone who challenges you, who makes you better, who sees the truth when you can't. I fell in love with that person, not as a boss, not as a CEO, but as a man who had forgotten what it felt like to respect someone, let alone love them. His voice cracked on the final word. I love you, Olivia Perry, and if you'll let me, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be a man who is worthy of your partnership, who respects you, and who protects you, always. Olivia listened, her heart a wild, fluttering thing in her chest. Every wall she had ever built, every defense she had ever raised, crumbled in the face of his raw, honest humility. She thought of the anonymous grant that had saved her brother's life. She thought of the damning evidence he had gathered against his own friend. She thought of the man who had stood beside her, not in front of her, as they faced down their enemies. She had seen his change, not in his words, but in his actions. He had earned this. Tears she didn't know she was holding back began to trace silent paths down her cheeks. She reached out and gently touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I know, she whispered, her voice full of an emotion that mirrored his own. I forgave you a while ago, Liam. A wave of relief so profound it was almost painful washed over his features. And for the record, she added, a small genuine smile finally breaking through, the first he had ever truly seen, I think I'm falling in love with that man too. He closed the small distance between them, and his kiss was not one of passion or possession, but of profound gratitude and gentle promise. It was a kiss that sealed not a deal, but a partnership, a quiet, heartfelt commitment between two equals who had walked through fire and found each other in the ashes. By the silent, flowing river, their new life had just begun. 2 years later, the light that filled their home was not the cold architectural glow of a penthouse, but the warm, golden wash of a late afternoon sun. It streamed through the large windows of a comfortable house nestled in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, illuminating the faint specks of dust dancing in the air and the rich grain of the hardwood floors. The scent was not of recycled air and ambition, but of brewing coffee, old books, and the faint, sweet perfume of roses from the garden. A burst of laughter echoed from the backyard. Liam, looking out from the kitchen window, smiled. He was no longer encased in Italian silk. A soft, worn-out sweater hung comfortably on his frame. Out on the lawn, a vibrant, healthy Leo, now a lanky teenager, was enthusiastically explaining the rules of a video game to Olivia, who was listening with a look of amused concentration. The scar on Leo's chest was a faint, silvery line, a testament to a battle won, a life reclaimed. Liam turned back to the counter, pouring 2 cups of coffee. The relentless engine of his empire still ran, but it no longer consumed him. He had rebuilt Harper Logistics from the ashes of Leandro's betrayal, but this time, the foundation was different. It was built on transparency, on integrity, and on a newfound respect for the people who worked for him. The hollowness that had once echoed inside him had been filled, not with more power or more wealth, but with the simple, profound warmth of this life. Olivia came in from the garden, her cheeks flushed from the cool air, a genuine, easy smile lighting up her features. She walked over to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. He's trying to convince me that a flawless run on his new game is a legitimate reason to extend his curfew, she said, her voice muffled by his sweater. And what did the brilliant financial mind of Olivia Perry Consulting decide? Liam asked, kissing the top of her head. I decided to defer to my partner for his expert opinion on negotiating with terrorists, she quipped. Her firm had become one of the most respected corporate ethics consultancies in the country. She didn't just find fraud, she helped companies build cultures where it couldn't take root. She wasn't the CEO's wife. She was a force in her own right, a woman who had taken her pain and forged it into a shield for others. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, watching the young man in their yard, their shared future. They were a power couple, not because of the empires they ran, but because of the sanctuary they had built together. Theirs wasn't a fairy tale ending, born of fantasy, but a quiet, sustainable happiness forged in the fires of betrayal, guilt, and redemption. It was a partnership, earned and cherished, between two people who had saved each other, and in doing so, had finally found their way home. And so, the turbulent journey of Liam and Olivia comes to a truly fulfilling conclusion. Thank you for sharing every step of this emotional ride with us, from the tension and suspense to the overwhelming joy. If this story touched your heart, please let us know by hitting the like button, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Which moment in the story resonated with you the most? Subscribe so you won't miss the meaningful journeys yet to come.